Midlife Crisis: Facts, Myths, and Pitfalls to Avoid by Horton Knight. Narrated by Sarah Owens. Chapter 1: Life at Midlife. Midlife is usually associated with dissatisfied events: the empty nest, menopause, adultery, financial issues, an alarming sense of death, and growing unhappiness with the day-to-day grind. Life in someone's 40s and 50s might look like a natural time to tally someone's failures and frustrations, of which there appear to be so many. Remarkably, midlife appears to be more of a crisis in some cultures than in others. While Western societies hang on to youth more tightly, people in the Eastern civilizations revere the knowledge that comes with aging. Maybe Western civilizations are too attached to the idea that there's trouble in this stage of life when it does not need to be that way. Fortunately, the concept that this is all there is can give way to life that is not all that bad. Does everyone have a midlife crisis? The idea of the midlife crisis typically centers on major life disturbances viewed as typical to this stage of life, like job loss, divorce, the death of parents, or the departure of kids from the home. An acute sense of someone's own aging and the needed efforts needed to make up for it also normally factor into understandings of middle-age angst. But is a midlife dilemma actually a typical part of the life expectancy, something almost everybody should expect to experience? Research suggests otherwise. Some people certainly do go through crises or rough patches after their 30s, and researchers have built a case on that, on average, life fulfillment reduces rather at the time of midlife before arising again in the senior years. However, there's great variation between individuals, and lots of people achieve new highs at work or in other domains throughout these years. Aging with the right mindset. Midlife usually brings concerns about health, stagnancy in a long marriage, physical aging, elderly parents or caretakers, being neck-deep in a child's college tuition payments, home loan charges, or anemic retirement funds. Those worries are fertile ground for a confounding state of mind that shouts, "It's normal to feel terrible at this stage." Midlifers may buy into this negative thinking and embrace self-fulfilling prophecies. That is how a favorite hobby or pursuit comes to an end. I'm just too old now. In truth, this is the right stage in life to explore new experiences and opportunities. The knees could not work well on the ski slopes, but they might do fine learning an activity such as Tai Chi. While this time period could be a really good period to reconsider one's life, a second life-altering midlife crisis is, in fact, far from inevitable. Signs. Little nagging doubts could appear, motivating a series of remarkable, seemingly irrational events and ultimately great change. An individual experiencing challenges with midlife will ask, "Is this all there is? Am I a failure?" Signs of a midlife crisis can vary from mild to extreme, consisting of fatigue, dullness, or dissatisfaction with life or a way of life, including people and things, that previously provided fulfillment. Frantic energy, feeling restless and wishing to do something totally different. Self-questioning, questioning decisions made years earlier and the meaning of life. Confusion about who you are or where your life is going. Daydreaming. Irritability or unforeseen anger. Persistent sadness. Increase in alcohol and drug use, food consumption, and other compulsions. Substantial reduction or increase in libido. Sexual affairs, especially with someone much younger. Significantly decreased or increased aspiration. Causes. These feelings at midlife can take place naturally or result from some considerable loss or change, like divorce or the death of a parent. Coming to terms with such loss or change can be challenging enough, but when complicated by a midlife shifts, the process can feel bewildering or overwhelming. Treatment. Managing the obstacles that persist in midlife takes some time and energy. The following assistance could help people accomplish a healthy living style in middle age. Explore, accept, and share your feelings. Enable yourself to reflect on your life frequently. Devote additional time to your partner, set new objectives, and develop new hobbies. Travel, volunteer, devote time to your kids. Pay closer attention to your mental health, and if necessary, consider joining a group or looking for a therapist. Exercise can help people maintain their health and a level of fitness needed for an active, independent life. Physical decline isn't always an unavoidable consequence of reaching midlife. Much of the physical frailty attributed to aging is actually the result of inactivity, disease, or poor nutrition, and many troubles can be reduced or even reversed with improved living style habits. One major benefit of routine exercise is protection against coronary heart disease. Physical activity also provides security against chronic diseases like adult-onset diabetes, arthritis, high blood pressure, certain cancers, osteoporosis, and depression. Research has also shown that exercise can minimize tension and stress and help people maintain an active sex life. A balanced, nutritious diet plan is also essential to good health, specifically in older grown-ups. Consuming a range of foods helps guarantee appropriate levels of minerals and vitamins. U.S. dietary guidelines also advise that grown-ups reduce their intake of fat, hydrogenated fat, cholesterol, sodium, and sugar as they age. Some grown-ups tend to gain weight in midlife. That is normally due to changes in hormones, but also to binge eating and inactivity. The best way to lose body fat is to eat fewer calories, especially from saturated fats, and to participate in aerobic workouts, even just a 20 to 30-minute brisk walk every day. Balance and dexterity are capabilities often taken for granted. Routine exercise can help maintain or restore them. A well-maintained sense of balance can also help make up for the lightheadedness in some cases caused by vision changes in midlife and beyond. Apart from this, toned muscles can help to stay away from the weakness and unsteadiness which contributes to falls. Sleep and rest are important rejuvenators in midlife, when people's sleep patterns may change. Grown-ups should include breaks in their everyday exercise program, particularly if they sleep less than 8 hours each night. Exercise can help relieve issues with insomnia also. More symptoms could include some of the particular things shown in the paragraphs that follow. Some people will gradually, yet just go through these steps, yet others will remain in one stage or swing back and forth between them. Any kind of change is either a risk of the unidentified or an opportunity to grow and enhance. If you or your spouse is able to reflect and learn much from the past and look with a positive eye of confidence to the future, you can both have a great experience in this intriguing period of your life. If you or your spouse, depending on who gets hit the hardest by the realizations and ideas, aren't able to do some internal investigation and change, then it could end up being a tough time for the both of you, with severe consequences ahead. Let's go over these stages, which are common for any sort of loss we experience. 1. Shock. An overwhelming feeling that breaks all expectations and is accompanied by a degree of horror and unhappiness. Fear, concern, frustration, and amazement are all included in this moment, which can be quick in most cases. Many people who experience something really distressing can remain in shock for a while, not talking to anybody, being spaced out or in their own world, or they just draw back without accepting reality. This leads into the next phase. 2. Denial. Remember what people say when something bad happens that they didn't expect? What's the first word they utter? They say, "No." In some cases, they keep repeating it. It's an expression that they can barely really believe what occurred. And despite the fact that the realization is still being pressed on their minds, they try to stay with the past because the past is more pleasant. Denial is a coping mechanism the brain instantly sets off to process the unforeseen loss. When men or women are rejecting what actually took place, they're defending their minds to endure and to move into admitting to what has happened. It's hard for many individuals to face themselves with their losses. How many times did you, as you were maturing, for example, look back at your parents' lives and conduct and gradually discover that they were not so flawless, only to run into the same weak points when raising your own kids? Confessing that your childhood was horrible, or that you weren't well known in school, that you were not attractive or successful, is hard. Self-help experts make the most of this. They talk people into more self-confidence and tell them to dream, to invest in themselves, and to eagerly anticipate the future. And although there's a lot of truth to it, I've experienced a lot of success because of my own work ethic just recently. They at times victimize those same people who have them turn over their cash just to be told how much potential they have. The fact that there is potential isn't even the point. The point is that they make the most of individuals' denial. Many people want to really believe that they are more than average. And yes, you can achieve a lot, but what's wrong with being average? Think about that for a moment. 3. Depression is certainly the next step. The loss is being confessed to, and the unhappiness overwhelms the individual who experiences it. People can get stuck in this stage too. I have been in an anxiety for a number of years, and it was hard to see anything in life in a greater light. A lot of times, the most successful people have gone through a bit of time period that depressed them. The best things to do are undoubtedly to find things to do that bring fulfillment when possible, and seek expert help if things are getting out of hand. 4. Once the sadness has been seen, people can attribute the loss to another person's doing. Somebody or something was to blame. They were the victim, meaning they lost something. Who or what did this to them? God? Another individual? Mere situations? Anger can be targeted at anything or anybody, and it's not wrong to allow some feelings of anger. The times it goes wrong is when the wrong people are blamed for it, or when people linger on these feelings. God is never to blame, naturally, and when people do, it simply means they have not traveled through this stage yet and aren't prepared for the next. It can be hard to let go of anger. I remember how I got blackmailed, robbed, and blocked in my organizations, and lost tens of countless dollars within the span of some months. Needless to discuss the businesses and people involved, haven't been validated by doing so in my mind. It was still evil. There was no excuse. I had a truly difficult time accepting it. I went through all of the phases of grieving, but I came to anger pretty rapidly, because I knew exactly who was to blame. And then, when no justice came, it was even harder. No one sued them. Nobody helped me get my cash back. Some individuals didn't even believe me, simply because they trusted the company. This can be a challenging time to transfer to the next stage in the mourning process. 5. Acceptance, in this case, means approval that it just happened, and there is absolutely nothing to do about it. Sometimes, there can be something done about it. However, approval includes just moving on, learning from what took place, and not letting the loss get to you any longer. It is gone, and it needs to stay gone. Other signs of a midlife crisis could include the following. Anger at your spouse. You or your spouse may have the propensity to blame one another for every little thing, unacceptable or boring in life. He or she could begin pointing out your faults and blame you for things that have nothing to do with you. Do not go along with this, and do not give in to their need for drama. You don't need to play the game and respond. It will not help. In his or her mind, you are at fault no matter what. That can result in a quick mood and anger without cause. Indecisiveness. Some wives reported their partners found a new woman, but refused to apply for divorce. They end up telling their partners that they never ever loved them in the first place, and that their marriage had been a mistake. Some of those spouses changed their mind typically, leaving the 1 minute after a lecture or some verbal abuse, only to come back after a day or a week and admitting in tears that they did not want to make the decision. When it gets to this point, there's most likely more going on than basic transition, but the midlife crisis can certainly contribute to this kind of conduct. Doubt and remorse about their marriage. It's not unusual for a couple who have been together for 25 or 30 years to tell one another unexpectedly that they were dissatisfied from the start. It could happen that a spouse in a midlife crisis implicates you of forcing or manipulating him or her into the relationship, question their love in the old days, and start believing you have been a terrible partner from the start. She or he might declare you never met their needs. If this happens, don't really believe anything he or she says. It's mirroring the short-term emotions they have on you. It's all in their head. Confusion about their identity and direction. This could include disliking things that are very important or overlooking a person's responsibilities. One husband noted that his spouse stopped her job, which she had had for 18 years, and returned to college. She questioned the existence of God after being spiritual and genuine for so long, and she begun doubting her values. A midlife crisis can make you or your partner time out for a minute and wonder, what is all helpful for anyway? Most women, particularly before the feminist movements, connected their identity and self-image to their role as mothers, and many partners connect their identity as an individual to their profession or career, which is common for a lot of guys. When the company or parenting role starts to vanish because of the transition, feelings of insecurity may occur. A desire for a new, passionate relationship or goal. The routine in your partner's life may have been among the killing elements of their youth psychologically. He or she may be done with the exact same old things happening in the bedroom on your day-to-day interactions. A cheating spouse could show signs like spending more time on the computer in chat rooms, odd phone calls, awkward hours at work, or pornography. Fear of humiliation amongst effective coworkers. A person in a midlife crisis could be reviewing his or her career and get a feeling of discontentment about their accomplishments. Taking a look at colleagues who have a greater wage, more success, more fame, or just a higher position in management might be more dismal, particularly when those associates are younger. It makes a lot of sense that after so many years of consistent effort, one may really wonder what went wrong and that some people will feel like a failure. Depression. Expect symptoms like an absence of energy, a loss of interest, sadness, headaches, pessimism, uncommon sleeping patterns, excessive weight loss or weight gain, or anorexia nervosa. If any, or a lot of these signs take place, your spouse might have come to a phase of depression. In that case, it would be better to look for professional help. Desire of youthfulness. This could include an important need for adventure and change, or for how things used to be. It could be that he purchases a car or bike, or that either the spouse or partner starts hanging out at the bars and gets home late. It's all about feeling young again. If you go along with his or her crazy skydiving strategies or sudden itinerary, it would be better than sitting in the house alone, wondering what is happening and doubting your marriage. Need for more alone time, or more being social with certain peers. This could sway both ways. Many people are attempting to leave from their worries or emotions of insufficiency by looking up certain peers to relive their youth or get far away from isolation by interacting more with others. Sometimes those encounters will remain shallow, though. Others may draw away from company and find more fulfillment in solitude, depending on the nature of your partner's character. Stronger or substantially less feelings of sexuality. The mental effects of a midlife crisis can end up being a physical expression, either of an increased or extreme need for sexual intimacy, or for a lack of it. Sexuality has a lot to do with an individual's self-esteem and self-image. For that reason, confusion, insufficiency, or an out-of-balance psychological level can have a tremendous influence on his or her sexual urge. Discontentment about social status. As I just mentioned, the accumulation of wealth can be an element that impacts someone's self-image. Somebody who rose above the crowd and fought his way up the social ladder may have a less difficult time accepting the shift, while others could enviously look up to peers and realize that they could or should have done more to build up their income. Need for experience. The dull routine of life has been dragging out in you or your partner's life, so a desire for change and variety is a typical thing. Adventure shows such a chance. Harmful sports, taking a trip, a new relationship, sports, or a new pastime may all try to compete to fill the empty feeling someone has been holding on to for so long. Additionally, middle-aged bicycle riders could A. Indulge themselves in alcohol or drugs. B. Show regret for their wrong choices in life. C. Purchase costly stuff like boats, motorcycles, sports cars, precious jewelry, and gadgets. D. Decide on having tattoos and piercings. E. Start a relationship with younger people. F. Pressure their children to master areas like arts, sports, or education. Other things anyone in a midlife crisis might be faced with is little things that could happen to anybody, but may be stronger to a guy or woman who is in his or her midlife crisis. 1. They want an easier life. 2. They still go to rock celebrations. 3. They begin looking up old boyfriends or sweethearts. 4. They recognize they will not be able to pay off their mortgage. 5. They worry over thinning hair or bald areas. 6. They want to save the world and be seen as a hero. 7. They're not letting go of their parents' deaths. 8. They review places they lived at as a child. 9. Obsessive compulsion of watching or reading the news. 10. They stop telling people their age. 11. They start taking more vitamin pills. 12. They worry about retirement. 13. They flirt with more youthful people in their 20s or 30s. 14. They search for medical signs and conditions on the internet. 15. They contemplate plastic surgery. 16. They become easily distracted. Chapter 2. Envy and the Midlife Crisis. Developmental change throughout life makes factors to consider of the life process both realistic and useful. Labeling, however, is fraught with issues, since labels add to understanding, but if rigidly held, constrain further assessment. Life cycle eras: teenage years, midlife, and older age. One model of life process sees it as 3 vibrant ages with a pivot at the center period. Therefore, midlife is preceded by adolescence and followed by older age. The midlife crisis has been a face value phenomenon for generations, and only has been formalized in the last 50 years. 20 years ago, though, the actual occurrence of a midlife crisis was questioned. That indecision about traditionally concerned life crises played out so many years ago when the teen crisis, first acknowledged as a period of strum and drug, storm and chaos, in the 19th century, was refuted by 20th century statistics. Therefore, when the adolescent crisis was deemed imaginary, the midlife crisis was also assumed to have a mythological coloring. Recognition of older age as a unique era, though, is unambiguous. Adolescent crisis, midlife crisis, and the crisis of older age are fractal dimensions of one another. All have primary genetic continuity with the biomedical experiences of infancy through childhood. There are many physiological and psychological changes in each accompanied by characteristic mental and behavioral differences. Midlife crisis. Midlife crisis describes the variable midpoint between birth and death for both men and women, covering ages 35 to 45. That life shift is defined as a crisis because a variety of disputes peak, linger, and are noticed as emergency situations. Those issues are defined by instability, threat, impending interruption, and confusion about efficient decision-making. That distinguishes a dilemma from the severe tension of trauma, which is a lot more circumscribed event. A painful trauma, by contrast, is unexpected, amazing, and overwhelming. It is perceived to be, and typically is, an objectively violent and devastating event. Injuries result in injuries that leave the distressed individual feeling numb, powerless, and cognitively out of commission. Particular experiences related to a midlife crisis include serious and sticking around feelings with regard to an intense consciousness of one's own mortality. Signs of this are more regular disease, pain, the appearance of aging, and possibly the death of someone's parents or peers. In addition, hints of impending frailness are evoked by less strength, vigor, and more tiredness. A diminishment of the enthusiasm so intensely felt in the earlier years becomes popular. Often, having an individual's own children leave home signals a qualitative shift in one's day-to-day regimen. For some, having kids and feeling the duties of parenthood are sobering. The midlife crisis usually brings a pensive position. Reviewing someone's earlier aspirations, life objectives, dreams, achievements, and latent accomplishments come forward. Work, occupation, life roles, and relationships go through reassessment. The very loss of youth and vibrant excitement end up being a plain awakening as one searches in the mirror or an image to find someone who appears strikingly in contrast to the implicit psychological image held about for the self for several years. When the midlife crisis is considerable, a depressive episode, although not necessarily a medical depression, takes place. Such a midlife depressive constellation, or sobering, takes shape based on somebody's temperament, defenses, and coping mechanisms. While anxiety is always present, other feelings may end up being under or overstressed. Unhappiness, sorrow, sadness, remorse, guilt, animosity, shock, or denial. Reassessment, though, is universal. This inescapable sobering, instead of being a misfortunate development, is in fact a natural chance for advancement. If the process is attentively considered, reconsidered, and given the executive planning that's needed, action-oriented brief and longer-term problem-solving, midlife crisis can become an efficient chance. Working through the cognitive and emotional parts is both reparative and salutary. Anxiety ends up being more workable. Devoted periods could be needed to organize and restructure the parts of one's life cycle. Revamping in time helps fine-tune and further support deeper gratitude, understanding, and combined application. Self-reflection and psychotherapy can be useful tools. What is the role of envy in considerations of the midlife crisis? Envy's mechanisms always involve an automatic splitting into polar extremes, idealization and decline. These evaluations dynamically shift and create confusion. What had taken place before midlife ends up being idealized and mourned. What is about to happen in older age can end up being devalued as a downhill journey. A major split in viewing someone's own life cycle usually yields a favorable before and possibly negative after. Even the term crisis suggests that in each era, stability is challenged and trauma indicated. Attitudes particular of envy are neuroticism, pessimism, decline, lack of inspiration, emotions of meaninglessness, bitterness, and so forth. They are all sprinkled at all points in efforts at negotiating vibrant reconciliations of the midlife crisis. Envy's negative examinations are always self-sabotaging, if not acknowledged and checked. Midlife transition as opportunity for more change. A healthy perspective in life cycle factors to consider is consciousness of the reality of change, transition, and chances for improvement. Perhaps the very reframing of the term midlife crisis to midlife transition is a first step toward reconfiguring a frame of mind from severe splitting toward a chance for steady transformation. Acting on these ideas with a timeout, grace, and perseverance brings a refinement to someone's emotional, cognitive, and spiritual existential self. Relationships with others, society, and culture takes on new meaning. Midlife crisis is now experienced as a midlife transition. That can end up being an expectant transition to new adventures, new hopes, and new dreams for oneself and an individual's loved ones who help to make life so meaningful. Chapter 3. Myths about the Midlife Crisis. Introduced to popular psychology in the mid-1970s, the midlife crisis is now entering its own midlife years. Unlike the decreasing of energy that is supposed to sap all middle-aged adults, however, the midlife crisis shows no sign of dropping off the horizon. Embedded in all media, from literature to the tabloids, the midlife crisis is used to clarify almost each aspect of adult personality, health, professions, and relationships. We can represent everything from wishing to get on a Harley or join the nightly club scene to the angst that inevitably accompanies the unhappy years stretching from the 40s to the 50s or beyond. The midlife crisis began really innocently with the less hyped-up name of the midlife transition. A Yale psychologist named Daniel Levinson released a book with several collaborators in the late 1970s called Seasons of a Man's Life, and he did mean man. Levinson and his team based their book on informal interviews with 40 guys, 10 from each of the 4 occupations. The midlife crisis got its punchy name with the aid of reporter Gail Sheehy, who published her own book, Passages, based heavily on Levinson's own work in addition to a similarly themed book by UCLA psychiatrist Roger Gould. Levinson believed that the midlife transition was one of several in life in which grown-ups examine and possibly reconstruct their life structures. Sheehy ramped up the volume by proposing that the age of 42 brought with it a predictable dilemma of impressive proportions that influences everyone, males and females. You could set your calendar, if not your watch, according to Sheehy, by the psychological twists and turns of an individual's life, accompanying each magic shift from decennium to decennium. Her entire premise, though, is very wrong, because age is really just a number, and usually an inaccurate one. The publication of Levinson's and then Sheehy's books triggered a flurry of empirical studies in the adult developmental psychology, attempting to validate their assertions. Actually, none of these research studies found the midlife crisis to be a universal or even near-universal phenomenon. To me, the most intriguing one was conducted through the Boston VA called the Normative Aging Research Study, Costa and McRae, 1980. The men in this research study were followed from their early 20s throughout adulthood, and the only ones who had a midlife crisis, for example, depression and despair, were ones who, in their 20s, were also depressed and anxious. Once a crisis-prone person, always a crisis-prone person, according to this research study. Another important research study was a national survey of over 3,000 women and men called Midlife in the United States, originally sponsored by the MacArthur Structure, Wethington, 2000. Of the little minority of the sample who claimed that they had experienced a midlife crisis, the age variety was so broad, up to 65 years, in the approximated time of the crisis, that it lost all meaning as a midlife experience, unless those people were optimistically believing that they would live to 130. I also did my own research on midlife, and like my coworkers, found no supporting proof. In my latest study, following 180 adults from college through midlife, released in The Look for Satisfaction, I reported, like the Normative Aging Research Study results, that the only people to have a midlife crisis had experienced a lot of crises throughout their adult years. These are just a few examples of research that couldn't support the generality of the midlife crises, not only as a universal phenomenon, but as a phenomenon at all. If you are depressed in midlife, there might be many reasons for this, the least of which is your age. The important bottom line is this: if you feel you or somebody you know is going through a midlife crisis, then it is important to look for intervention, whether it be through therapy, psychotherapy, or other contact with a psychological health expert. There's no reason for a midlife crisis to take place spontaneously just because you turn a specific age. Here are some myths. 1. The 10-year-old station wagon has to be changed. Your partner wants another station wagon. You want a 150-mile-per-hour car. Some never ever learn. Naturally, this is the iconic image of midlife crisis popularized in American Beauty, when Lester buys his own red sports car to drive and another toy one to have fun with in the house. This is the number one myth because it has become so emblematic of midlife silliness. It is most likely not actually worth dignifying with statistics, but if red is supposed to be the color of choice for midlifers, it's disappointing up that the way people's buying routines. In general, red vehicles account for a small portion of car colors, and although it is supposed to represent sexiness, dynamism, and high energy, People of all ages appear to have tamer tastes. Can a disagreement over vehicles cause divorce? As an American beauty, this divergence would represent deeper-seated problems than just which automobile to park in your driveway. 2. Both of your parents have died. You understand that you are now the older generation. It's not a myth that people lose their parents or caretakers in their adult years, nor is it a myth that this is stressful. The myth is that the experience must inevitably be connected to crisis, and that it should be connected with midlife. People have normative expectations about the events in their lives that include living past their parents. Just because we have our early adult lives to prepare for this fact, there is no reason to assume that it must always cause a crisis. Additionally, belonging to the older generation doesn't need to trigger undue stress, as people are well prepared to take on these positions to guide and direct and support the younger generations. 3. You're sick of manual labor. Go back to college and get your degree. It's not a myth that people go back to college in midlife, and in fact, they are progressively very likely to do so. The myth is that this is progressively more demanding, and that it will cost you cash. Going back to college simply because you now have the chance to, or because you understand that you need more education, is a favorable step to take, no matter what your age. If you don't like manual work, this would be a valid reason to look for a degree to give you the chance to check out a new profession. You're going to also likely increase your income just because a college degree is, even in the present economy, related to higher profits. 4. At last, your first affair at the time of 18 years of marriage. Your partner is delicious by any basic, but you cannot perform. I'm not exactly sure why this doesn't qualify for a divorce point, but let's presume the spouse is not aware of your choice to participate in this allegedly typical midlife crisis conduct. Contrary to this scenario, typical age-related chances do not involve loss of sexual interest or ability. Stress, overwork, and in this case, guilt, may play a much bigger role when it comes to looking for an affair. 5. Many couples develop a lasting friendship and concern for one another, which transcends sex and which will take them into their later years. You, though, are interested in tight young flesh and transitory relationships. Following from the above card, this one is only half of a myth. The first sentence is correct, though transcending sex entirely could overemphasize the case. The second sentence makes the first one sound ludicrous. Of course, if you have faith in a midlife crisis, it would make a lot of sense to want tight young flesh. Still, this isn't what most midlife grown-ups really want or even do. Rather, most couples actually do enjoy the ties that bind throughout the years, and they have an active sex life at the exact same time. 6. You have just returned from your class reunion. You were the only one there who wasn't a sensational success and who could not remember the school song. Not succeeding is easy to understand, but you wrote the school song. Let's unpack this card to find its two hidden myths. Myth 1 is that you were the only one there who wasn't a sensational success. At the time of the throes of a midlife crisis, so the myth goes, you must come to grips with your inability to realize your vibrant dreams. Narcissistically, you're convinced that everybody else takes a look at you as a failure. In reality, Many people aren't so narcissistic that they believe that everyone in their social circle is looking at them. Myth 2 is that you could not remember the tune you wrote. This uses the myth of unavoidable memory loss, or senior moment, as part and parcel of midlife. Unfortunately, once people begin to purchase into this myth, they could actually intensify their chances of keeping their cognitive function in great shape. 7. The wrinkles in your face are becoming excruciating. Make arrangements for a facelift and begin to stress. It's true that wrinkles accumulate as people grow older, though one of the worst perpetrators, the sun, can quickly be avoided if you start using sunscreen when young. Still, does everybody feel that these wrinkles are truly excruciating? Again, the midlife crisis myth says that as we age, we inevitably feel despondent about our aging faces. Having said that, the reality is that people accept changes in their faces and somewhere else because they take place slowly throughout life. Some individuals even take pride in their laugh lines and really believe that they help them look smarter and wittier, if not somewhat older. Keep in mind that several cards in the deck describe other normative age changes with comparable pronouncements of doom, gloom, and stress points, when in fact, most people adapt well over time. 8. Time to return into shape. This myth about midlife assumes that starting to work on enhancing your health through diet and exercise is inevitably undesirable and difficult. Contrary to this myth, choosing to enhance your health isn't a reason to increase your stress levels. Actually, exercise is just one of the best ways to maintain your physical and psychological functioning and constantly keep from some of the other problems thought to be intrinsic to midlife. You'll be far better able to deal with stress by returning into shape, and you'll also make certain that your midlife doesn't refer to 20 or 30 rather than 40, 45, or longer. 9. At 3 a.m. on Thursday morning, June 16th, you discover that you have no value system. No answers regarding what is really crucial and beneficial in life. That is a trigger for concern. Or is it? This midlife crisis myth is based on the presumption that the desire to find meaning in life strikes with a revenge when people hit their 40s. Not as demanding as being able to not perform while having an affair, but stressful nonetheless. Contrary to this myth, people slowly develop in their values, beliefs, and insights as they go through life. There is not likely to be one point that anybody could identify during which they became mindful of their values or lack of values, or that this point is even attached to a specific age. Ultimately, you'll have greater well-being if you can move to a point of recognizing what is essential and beneficial. 10. Give up your high-paying, high-pressure job to work with clay. You develop a deep respect for mud and tolerance for poverty. I would agree with you other than for the implied presumption that the only way to minimize your stress is to forfeit your job and chase after your dream job. Instead, people can lose stress at any point in life by making the most of some of the extremely exact same techniques we have already looked at: exercise, values explanation, career changes, looking for interference if you're having personal or relationship issues. It may be fine to give up your job and seek creative satisfaction, but it's more realistic to include steady, stress-releasing, enter your everyday life, at least in the beginning. To summarize, There isn't a single part of the mythical midlife crisis principle that includes positive development or change. These leading 10 myths are each uncomfortable in their own way, indicating that as we age, we inevitably must handle loss, failure, relationship problems, and existential despair. Perpetuated by the media, which is still fascinated with the concept, the midlife crisis is the mental equivalent of a hurricane. Most people are more likely to follow a disaster in the news than they are to pay close attention to the peaceful status quo. If you're convinced that you are having a midlife crisis, it might be beneficial for you to act on the parts that worry you the most, whether it is your health, your relationships, your job, or your well-being. The midlife years span many decades, and with luck, or a little help if you need it, can be physically and mentally gratifying ones. Chapter 4. Preventing a Midlife Crisis. Many people who have a hard time during midlife and go into dilemma mode do so just because of external elements. They may be experiencing tension in their life that makes the shift harder, or they could have a youth problem that was never handled that comes into the surface during this time. Some changes typify this time period: misery with life, dullness, an important need for change and adventure, questioning their choices. Here are some external factors that can set off a midlife crisis, some of which I mentioned earlier. 1. Debt. All the credit cards and loans make it too simple to enter into money debt. It piles up, and before you know it, it's hard to get out. Society screams that we can get what we really want quickly, even with a few mouse clicks, or just purchase with one click and pay it off later. The middle-aged period in life can already be difficult, but attempting to pay off debt might add a lot more stress. Debt management firms can help you with your financial resources. An individual in a midlife crisis can draw the incorrect conclusion that it is simpler to ignore his or her family to keep away from the battle against financial debt. 2. Death of a parent or caretaker or loved one. Grief can add to the doubts and indecisiveness a person is already experiencing. That can become overwhelming, especially when their burial and funeral service use up a lot of time, money, and organizing. 3. Avoidant character. A person who builds up stress inside rather than confront their fears or issues can end up being mentally distant. Generally, those with such a character have a harder time finding direction in life. Embarrassment, guilt, and rejection can play a part in their everyday feelings. There are people who will just run away from their issues rather than solve them. Divorce can be just one of the more extreme results of this. Of course, you cannot always keep away from these situations, but you can handle them in a different way, like handling your finances better, facing your problems, or being mentally prepared for the death of your parents. Those who live a fulfilling life from the start, people who work toward making their dreams a truth, are less likely to go through a midlife crisis. Meeting your own needs and those of your partner can help you and him or her when the transition starts to happen. The following mindsets and action can help you and your partner stay away from a midlife crisis. 1. Set practical goals and attain them. 2. Start planning out the most essential direction you want to go. 3. Be flexible. 4. Establish what your most essential values and wishes are. 5. Take care of others, not just yourself. 6. Take time off and do something fun in your spare time. An individual who only gives and never requires time for him or herself will have a higher risk to experience a midlife crisis. 7. Find a balance between caring for your own needs and for those around you. 8. As a female spouse and/or mom, find other interests than your home, like a sideline, a hobby, or an enthusiasm. 9. As a partner and/or father, try not to connect your identity to your job. Then, when you are done working or you lose your job, you'll still find fulfillment in life. This has been Midlife Crisis: Facts, Myths, and Pitfalls to Avoid by Horton Knight. Narrated by Sarah Owens.